Okay, good morning, everybody, or good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world, and welcome to this Bigger Plate webinar, where we're going to be looking at MindMeister for students. MindMeister, the mind mapping software you can see on the screen right now, hopefully, and hopefully you can hear me okay. I'm coming to you today live from just outside San Francisco in California. It's a beautiful, beautiful morning here, 9 a.m. here, and I can see a really great international audience on the line today. So welcome wherever you are in the world. I can see the Netherlands, I can see a few Americans, and I can see a few others as well. So thank you very much for taking the time out of your day to join us today. I'm going to give you a sort of a quick run through how I think MindMeister can be really, really beneficial for students. I'll tell you a little bit of the background of Biggerplate, which is very much grounded in my experience as a student, albeit now some years ago. And I just want to show you sort of three particular use cases where I think mind mapping software like MindMeister can make a huge, huge difference for students of sort of really any age, but particularly I think once you get into sort of high school and university age students, this stuff can really, really add a lot of value. So I'm going to use the mind map on the screen today as the sort of core of our presentation. I'm going to start up here, as you might expect, with a welcome, and then we're going to work clockwise around the mind map until we get around to conclusion. So for anybody who's new to mind mapping, this idea of sort of working and reading clockwise around the mind maps is a pretty good principle to keep in mind. So as we look at the mind map, we're imagining sort of going right around the clock face from start through to finish. And you'll see most of the mind maps I'm going to show in this session are going to sort of follow that logic. So I've got a couple of people saying the sound is great. So thank you for letting me know. That's always useful. I'm not going to put on a camera today because I've got a bit of a glare in my eye from the right side. So I'll be looking like I'm squinting at you. So what we've got over here then is our welcome. So let's dive straight into our content and see what we can learn about mind mapping for students. So first and foremost, as I say, my name is Liam Hughes. I'm the founder of Biggerplate.com. And really importantly, in terms of the position I'm speaking to you today, I was a really, really bad student. Particularly at university, I was having a really, really great time, but not really studying very hard. I was always doing my assignments at the very last minute. I was always that person sort of panicking before exams. So I'm not speaking today from the position of an authoritative, very well organized student. I'm speaking today from the position of someone who was really disorganized as a student. And I suspect for those of you maybe who are students on the line, or maybe those of you who are educators or parents, I suspect more people probably fall into the disorganized category than the highly organized category. So I was not a particularly applied student. But off the back of my experience as a student came Biggerplate, and that's what I've been doing since 2006 or 2008, depending on which way you look at it. My details there, that's my LinkedIn profile there on the screen. It'd be a pleasure to connect with any of you on the line today who I'm not already connected to. Please feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. Do let me know that you joined the webinar, as I get a lot of invitations from people I don't know. So please let me know you're in the webinar. It'd be great to connect with you and sort of learn what you're trying to do with mind mapping, or what you're already doing with mind mapping. So a couple of quick abouts. So for those of you who are unfamiliar with biggerplate.com, that's my company, just to give you a quick heads up around who we are, what we do. Biggerplate was founded in 2008, or the website was launched in 2008. And really that was the result of mind mapping software really saving my university degree. I was doing very poorly, having a great time and not studying, and basically was told that if I didn't pass certain exams, then I was going to be politely, or maybe not so politely, asked to leave. And I was introduced to mind mapping software purely by coincidence. And I'd never encountered this even by the age of sort of 19, 20. And it absolutely changed things for me. I didn't suddenly become a grade A student, but I managed to pass the exams and stay in university and actually finish a degree. And from that came this really kind of quite simple idea, which is, well, why can't students get their academic study materials in mind map format? And not just a picture of a mind map, but a real kind of working file, so something that they can add information to, something that they can edit, adapt, and change so that they can really personalize the information. So the idea for Biggerplate was that perhaps teachers or other students would share mind maps that then other students could download and adapt and edit and really personalize, so the meaning, so the content meant something to them. So the MindMap library was launched in 2008, and we've obviously done a lot of different things since then and grown. And really our purpose, our mission, why we exist really is to help people go further with mind mapping. So what we're best known for is we've got a huge library of mind map templates covering education, business, home, sort of pretty much anything you can think of. We have a growing and sort of soon to be reinvigorated set of courses for software like MindMeister and other kind of topics. And we have a very regular calendar of webinars and virtual events to help people, again, learn and see what's possible with mind mapping tools and techniques. Importantly, for those of you who maybe are not familiar with Biggerplate, we're software neutral. And what this means is we don't make or sell any software. So I'm showing you MindMeister today. We don't make or sell MindMeister, but we're a very long-term partner of MindMeister, the terrific company, lovely people. We've worked with MindMeister for many, many years, but we do not make or sell any software ourselves. We aim to be an independent, neutral hub, resource hub, really, for people who want to learn how to use tools like MindMeister. For those of you who do want to learn how to use tools like MindMeister and mind mapping in general, on Biggerplate, most of what we do is free. But if you wanted to upgrade to our Pro membership, you can actually get a great discount on that at the moment. The normal cost is $29 a year, so it's already pretty cheap. But you can actually save 50% on that price if you use the code Meister22 before the end of January. So time running out to use that particular discount code. And that's going to give you access to all of our courses, webinars, and really everything that there is on Biggerplate. You'll get access to with the Pro membership. For those of you who are maybe not familiar with MindMeister, maybe you've just clicked a link and ended up on this webinar today. MindMeister is the mind mapping software you see on the screen. And I'm going to assume, just for the sake of a slightly easier journey for everyone, I'm going to assume that everybody joining the call today knows nothing about MindMeister. Now, that's obviously not going to be true, but it makes it a little bit easier for me to just show the core features and functionality of the tool without getting lost in too much of the detail and advanced functionality. MindMeister is one of the most easy to use, intuitive mind mapping tools out there. So what I really want to show you today is just some of the really basic things that I think students can leverage to help them in their studying and their working. Again, for those of you who maybe aren't yet MindMeister customers, you can actually get a discount on MindMeister as well. If you use the code Biggerplate when you're on the MindMeister website, you can actually save 10% on your MindMeister subscription. So some great offers there to take advantage of while you can. So this webinar today, hopefully nice and simple, relatively short and sweet, hopefully. Who's it for? Well, primarily it's for students. I know it's unlikely we've got too many students on the line today. We tend to attract more in the, I think, anxious parents and educators category. So we're always hoping that we get students on the line, really of all ages. But as I mentioned at the beginning, I really think when students get into kind of high school, later stages of high school, and then into college and university stage, the volume and complexity of information that they are supposed to kind of comprehend and connect up just goes up a level, but the techniques they have for managing all of that information and complexity really stay the same. So you have students, and I was one of them at sort of later high school stages and at college, university, still relying on some pretty basic techniques to learn information for our subjects. Now, I think we need sort of better techniques as that complexity and that information volume goes up. And that's where I really feel like students, particularly in these age groups, could really do with mind mapping tools like MindMeister. For educators on the call today, I'm hoping you'll just see maybe some of you are already using mind mapping in the classroom setting or in your sort of tutoring, whatever it might be. I'm hoping I might just give you some ideas, some pointers, some sort of tips today that you can then go and help your students to leverage. And of course, parents on the line, anybody who's got children really of any age who might benefit from using mind mapping software. Obviously, if you as the parent suggested, it's going to be way less appealing because you're the parent. But hopefully, again, you can maybe take some ideas and some sort of tips here that might help your kids in their studying. I'm going to focus today on just 3 student uses, just briefly, and hopefully 3 uses that really kind of build on each other. So I'm going to talk briefly about note-taking using MindMeister, and then we're going to look at how sort of note-taking might lead to knowledge building around a subject and actually starting to connect up all these kind of notes you've taken and maybe making it all a bit more coherent. And then finally, I want to just touch briefly on using mind mapping software to help with written essays and assignments. So probably the better way of writing that, because essays isn't always a word that translates into every language, but written assignments is something that maybe a lot of people wouldn't think of using mind mapping for, but I think it's absolutely tremendous for organizing your ideas and your information when you're trying to put together a written assignment. So that's what I'm going to cover today. It's worth just mentioning in terms of how we're going to manage the session. We've got David from MindMeister on the call today as a panelist. And David is David Moore. You might see his name in the chat or the panelists. And David's going to just try and answer any of your questions that come in on the Q&A. So I always just say to people that the chat box in Zoom can sometimes move a bit too quickly for me to keep up with. So if you've got a specific question that you'd like me to try and address, please just pop it in the Q&A panel. That's a bit different to the chat, and it just means David and I, between us, can hopefully try and cover your questions. So while I'm presenting, David's going to be trying to manage that questions box and just write some answers. And then once we get to the end of the session, I'll be looking at that questions panel and just seeing if there's any questions maybe that I can elaborate on or touch on where maybe David hasn't been able to. Specifically, if you have any questions about pricing or subscriptions or upgrades or anything like that, again, Biggerplate is not involved in that. So I won't touch any of those kind of questions, but David might be able to help you either in the chat here or subsequently with a member of his team. So thank you, David, in advance for your question handling and hopefully helping people get to some of the basics there. So let's dive into the first of our use cases, which is note-taking. Now, this is a slightly tricky one for me to demonstrate in real time because I can't kind of take notes on myself, but I just want to try and illustrate how it might sort of be done and why it might be helpful. So some of the challenges I think with note-taking is really kind of capturing the key information and then connecting things up. Now, when I was studying at university, which is now sort of 15 years ago, we were still in the era of kind of pens and paper. I don't think that's probably the case anymore. Most people at universities particularly are probably working away on their laptops, but the principles still apply. So keeping up with the information as it comes at you, capturing it in a coherent way that actually makes sense when you look back at it, and then also ensuring those notes are sort of usable and make sense later on down the line. Now, whether you're writing with pen and paper, so if like me with pen and paper, I had really very messy handwriting, so I sometimes couldn't even read my own notes. But even if I was using a sort of a word processing document to take my notes, one of the problems we have here is information just being sort of in a big stream of linear information that makes it a little bit harder for us to see how things connect up. If we're using mind mapping, we've got some real advantages here in terms of note-taking, both in the practical sense of just keeping up with a lesson or a lecture, but also in terms of that usability of those notes and actually developing them more after the fact. So mind maps are and generally should be, it's a good idea to try and keep your mind maps pretty keyword focused. You'll see in terms of what's on the screen at the moment, there's only sort of 1, 2, or 3 words at a time in any topic. And that's a pretty good principle to keep in mind. It's not a rule, it's not a law, but it's a good idea to just try and keep your mind maps focused on just a few keywords at a time rather than full sentences. There's a number of reasons for that, but the most important from my side is it makes it easier to add, edit, and kind of quickly understand where you are. If you clutter your mind map up with really big blocks of text, it can be much harder to edit and adapt. And then that's also going to make it easier to keep up with the lecture much more easily. So if you've got sort of small just topics with just a couple of words at a time, it's easy to add, to edit, just, you know, a new topic info comes in here and then something else is said. And, you know, don't even worry about things like I've just done there, like a quick typing error. You'll make sense of it and you can edit and adapt very easily. And importantly, if the topics are nice and small with just a couple of words, it's very easy in MindMeister to just move topics around to make sure things are where they belong or in the most logical structure. And that brings us on now to the sort of second benefit of using mind mapping is that structure. So instead of having just a big long stream of notes from a lecture or a lesson, what we actually have in a mind map is this built-in structure. And it's not particularly sexy or exciting, but it's one of the most powerful aspects of mind mapping is it forces you to put that information into some sort of hierarchy, some sort of logic. That also means that every piece of information you add to the mind map is added in some sort of context. No piece of information is really just kind of floating around on its own because you have to essentially place everything into this tree structure. And in doing so, you're making sure, whether you sort of mean to or not, that everything is kind of connected into something else. So, for example, we can always kind of follow the branch back and see, how do we get to this? Okay, we were talking about structure and we're talking about using mind maps. So this built-in structure means that when you come to look back at these notes, which might be several weeks later, you're going to always be looking at information in context. So it's easy to move and reorder things to make sure that you've got things in a hierarchy and a logic that makes sense within this tree structure. Other things we can do within MindMeister is use the tool to give ourselves little sort of visual reminders. So, for example, we could suggest to use things like the icons in the software. So we could, for example, add a little icon that says we need to look back on this topic because perhaps it was something we maybe didn't understand. So we can use, you see lots of different little icons in the software here that we can use, but we might choose to use something perhaps like this one that's just a little icon we could use. We could color it slightly differently. We can give ourselves these kind of little signals that says there's a piece of information here, a topic that maybe you didn't understand or you want to review it later. So we can use any of these kind of icons within MindMeister to sort of codify our information. So we can use lots of different signals and make sure we understand what we mean by adding these into the mind map and giving ourselves little cues that says you need to look at this later, or you need to understand this. So maybe we've got this little icon that means we need to do some more research. And this means as you take your notes, even if you don't entirely understand something right then in the moment as you take the notes, you could just attach one of these icons and it's a little signal to yourself later that this was maybe a piece of information that stands out. Maybe it was a key idea or a key concept, or maybe you need to go and ask the teacher or research later, whatever it is. The other thing we can do in MindMeister is draw very clear connections between information. So where we've got the structure of the mind map, this tree structure means everything follows in this kind of structure, but sometimes you might want to draw connections between things that aren't visible. So you see what we can do in MindMeister here is actually add these kind of connection lines between our topics. So if I just delete that and start a new one, for example, we could say, come into here. And let's say we want to draw a connection between our connections topic and our challenge up here that we think one of the challenges students face is connecting things up. So MindMeister is going to make it nice and easy for us to make these lines and links really visual and visible, even if they're not in the same section of the kind of the tree structure. We can kind of swap these arrows back and forward, or we can have it sort of going both directions, whatever we want. So lots of options here to really make certain information visible and visual. The final sort of note, really, it's not sort of a tip, but it's really just to say, sort of trust your brain a little bit more. When you put information into the mind map structure and you have this kind of tree structure where everything is placed in a location, it gives it more meaning by what it's attached to, you'll remember a lot more than you think. It's quite surprising how you can go back and look at old mind maps, and even just with a few words at a time, because it's all structured like this, the context fills in a lot of the blanks. Now, a lot of people who maybe in lectures will try to write sort of almost word for word what their teacher or their lecturer says, they're going to get really stressed out because they're never going to be able to do that unless you're sort of typing 1,000 words a minute. But actually, if you use a mind map, just using a few keywords and the structure of the mind map, the context that the structure gives every topic really means your brain kind of fills in the blanks really successfully. It doesn't need to know every word. And that again brings us back to this idea of if you've got to study your old notes prior to an exam or a test, it's actually a really great way of being able to review information without getting bogged down in huge long sentences and really text heavy learning materials. You can just look at these nice visual summaries and your brain will fill in a lot of the blanks for you, just prompted by the structure and the keywords. Now, as I say, demonstrating note-taking in real time in a webinar is a little bit tricky. I've never kind of figured out a smart way to do it. But let's just sort of use an example of, this is a mind map that I created a couple of years ago with actually a group of, they were maybe 10 to 12-year-olds in Nigeria. And we were doing a virtual sort of classroom session, and I was illustrating with them how you might build up a mind map kind of note-taking. And we kind of created this mind map as a group. Now, MindMeister is actually collaborative mind mapping software. So you could even get your students working on the same mind map at the same time. Now, obviously, you need to sort of establish how that's going to work because it can get a little bit chaotic. But MindMeister gives you the potential to have your students working on a mind map at the same time. And that could even include note taking. But let's look at this mind map here, which is a mind map we created where I asked that group, what do you know about England? So as they were giving me their ideas, we started to kind of capture different things they knew. They had, as you might expect, sort of 10, 12-year-old boys in particular. They went pretty much straight down to sport and football and Premier League, and they would name the teams that they were maybe following or that they knew in Manchester United or Manchester City, all these kind of things. And all I was doing was sort of note-taking what they were talking about. And then importantly, what we're doing is capturing and categorizing. So you see, we're building out this structure. So they start talking about the Premier League, and I can say to them, well, what other sports do you know about? And they maybe thought about rugby, or they maybe thought about cricket. And then they said, well, we don't understand cricket. And I was able to reassure them that a lot of English people like me also don't understand cricket. So not to worry. But the key thing is what we're doing in the mind map is just capturing, as you see here, a few keywords at a time. Now, obviously, talking about the food and drink of England is maybe not the academic materials we wanted, but it's just illustrating the ability to take the notes and put them into a structure. So we ended up with a branch called culture, sports, food and drink, and music kind of came off from that. But if we go into slightly more sort of academic materials, what we might also have had here was history. So I said, well, can you tell me anything about the history of England? Do you know any history of England? So again, they started to sort of throw out some things that they knew maybe a little bit about, some of the explorers and kings and queens. And so we just started in the mind map again to sort of do our note taking, building out anything we know. Now, these are maybe some of the more famous kings and queens. I think the kids that I was doing a session with, they knew about the current queen, Elizabeth II. And if I was note-taking by myself in a session, and we've got Elizabeth II, who's the current queen of England, for example, one of the great things you can do, and this is kind of maybe nicer for the younger students, is you might just do a quick Google search, say, well, who is Elizabeth? Sorry, my Zoom controls are in the way here. Let's go Elizabeth II. Maybe we find an image of the current queen. There she is. We can copy that image and we can actually just paste that right into MindMeister as a little visual reminder. Now, I'm not even going to start talking about things like copyright images. I don't really know, but that's from Wikipedia, so I think I'm probably safe. It's probably taking a little bit longer than usual just because I'm running a Zoom call, but we can just bring images into the mind map, and it's a really nice way, particularly, as I say, for those younger students to maybe make their mind maps a little bit more interesting. But for maybe older students, what you might use is, instead of photos of people from Wikipedia, you might be bringing in, for example, scientific diagrams. So for example, if you were studying biology and you needed to bring in diagrams of cell structures, to be able to just pull these images into the mind map and then break out the information related to them means everything comes into one place, and your note taking is going to be much, much richer, but also really, really structured. And again, the structure is not sexy. It doesn't sound particularly exciting, but that's where I've always seen the power of mind mapping, is really in breaking down this structure of information into these component parts. So a note-taking mind map is something that you hopefully could encourage your students, or if you are a student, just start trying to do note-taking during your lessons in a mind map instead of a Word document or Evernote or pen and paper, whatever it is, and just see how you get on using the structure and just a few keywords at a time using a mind map. Importantly, if you maybe feel a bit unsettled or nervous about trying to do that live in an actual lesson or a lecture, a really good way to do that is just to practice using things like YouTube videos. So, for example, when I do presentations or classes or workshops with business, I would encourage them to, go and watch some TED Talks and just try mind mapping a TED Talk or things like this. But for students to watch a video about English history, for example, you could just practice your note taking in a mind map, and you'll find you kind of actually relieve some pressure because you're not trying to capture every word. You can just leave yourself these little visual signals that say, I didn't really understand that piece, so I need to come back to it later, but I'm not going to get worried about it now. I'm just going to save myself these little visual signals. And then, as I illustrated, hopefully relatively easily, to be able to personalize the mind map, to add the images, to change the color and the format, and really make that information your own. So really make kind of that information feel like your notes, your learning, whether it's changing the shapes, the colors, whatever it is. And again, particularly for those younger students, they tend to sort of get quite into formatting the mind map, and they start to almost forget that it's actually sort of schoolwork because they focus essentially on kind of making it look nice quite often. But you as the educator or you as a student, you've got to remain diligent in ensuring the content is there, even as they start to make it sort of nice. But you can really sort of customize and personalize your notes and make it slightly more meaningful to you, as well as benefiting from that structure and that order that the mind map's naturally going to provide for you. So let's have a quick look at note-taking as a concept. I'm just going to pause briefly, have a quick look at Q&A to see if there's anything in there that I can pick up that David's not. There's a question there I don't entirely understand about perpendicular, so that's very exciting. I'll have to have a think about what perpendicular means. And I can see David's picking up a couple of other questions. So I'm going to keep going, but please do keep those questions coming in the Q&A, and between David and I will hopefully cover them, including something about being perpendicular. So let's say we've done some note-taking. We're a student, we've maybe been sat in several classes over the course of several weeks, and we've been diligently taking notes using MindMeister. So what are we really trying to do with note-taking? Well, actually what we're trying to do is build knowledge. We need to build our understanding of the subject and hopefully really connect up our understanding of the concepts within that subject. So this is where I think we can start to really tackle some of the other challenges that arrive here. So some of the challenges I certainly found, that I know lots of other students have, is actually connecting up those concepts. So maybe in week 1, you're studying plant cells, and in week 10 you're studying something that seems very unrelated to plant cells, but actually it is related, and we need to be able to see how these kind of things do connect up. So connecting concepts, whether it's the big picture and the small details, but also connecting up these concepts over time. So as I said, what you studied in week 1 might feel quite detached from what you're studying in week 10, and we need to be able to see and understand how these concepts do connect up. So what we've got to try and get to is something that's going to help us really get a holistic, overall connected view of our subject, whatever that subject might be, whether it's history, geography, biology, whatever it might be. And of course, for many students, the focus of that sorry, there's a dog going slightly nutty outside trying to get a squirrel. Surprisingly, the dog has not succeeded in getting the squirrel. Apologies if you can hear a dog barking down the line. Other things we can do here, or really what a lot of students are going to be concerned about or focused on, is obviously preparing for exams. So taking all these notes and making all of these great mind maps is quite often going to be geared towards an end of year test, a midterm, or an SAT, or whatever it might be in your particular country, in your particular stage of education. And one of the problems, again, that certainly I suffered from was I had really disconnected and pretty poor quality notes. My notes were poor to start with, and they weren't connected up well together. And that meant I wasn't really able to see or kind of clearly understand my knowledge gaps. And then, of course, you're up against that time pressure. And particularly if you're disorganized like I was, you've left far too much until the last minute. Now, this is where I think mind mapping, I think a lot of students, myself included, arrive at mind mapping because they're looking for shortcuts. And I wouldn't want to say mind mapping is a shortcut, but certainly I found it could speed up my learning processes. It sped up my ability to fill the knowledge gaps. I felt I was able to do more and understand more in less time by using the mind mapping format. So certainly when it comes to exam preparation, even if you've left it quite late, I would really, I would certainly personally endorse mind mapping as a pretty good last roll of the dice if you're feeling a bit ill prepared. So again, how is MindMeister and mind mapping going to help us? Well, really what we're going to be trying to do here is build on that note taking. So we're in a class, we may have taken our notes in a mind map, and they may still be relatively messy, maybe not fully developed. What we really want to do when we're starting to think about knowledge building is really building on those notes. So again, if you're a disciplined student, that means perhaps after a lesson or a lecture, within a few days, you sit down and you look at that mind map that you took during the lesson, and you then just build it out. So you add some depth and some detail to that map. Now, there's some really great functionality in MindMeister that's going to help you to do that. And there's two features in particular that I think students really should be using. So the first is topic notes, and then the second is hyperlinks, or what's called in new MindMeister is attachments, but it sort of works in the same way. So topic notes is a way that you can add a lot of extra detail and depth to a topic without creating big blocks of text on the page. So remember what I said earlier, we want to keep this surface level mind map just based on a few keywords at a time, 2, 3, 4 words at a time. What we want to avoid is big chunks of text that become hard to manage, move, edit. So we want to avoid, most of the time anyway, things like this. We want to avoid big blocks of text because this is hiding the key information between too many words. But the notes function is a really good way of adding a lot of information to a topic without creating that clutter. So what we could do, for example, is we could take all of this block of text and we could add it in as a note into the mind map. So we can just say add a note, click here, and you see what we can do is just add lots of extra text here, lots of extra text without cluttering up the surface level of our mind map. And then we can close the notes. And let's get rid of this big block of text. And now we've got a new topic here, but this little visual signal from MindMeister tells me that there's more information just beneath the surface. So I can click that note and it just pops open here for me to read and understand it. So this is a really great way to add lots of depth and detail into your note-taking mind maps without creating clutter. So if, for example, we went back to our Wikipedia page, I think we had one here. What I would quite often do if I was, even in business, I might copy a chunk of text. I might come back to perhaps one of my mind maps, my history, my kings and queens. And for example, on my Elizabeth II branch, I might say, I'm going to add some notes, and that text that I just took from Wikipedia, I'm just going to paste that into there. Now, I don't want this amount of text. So what I don't want to do is this. I don't want this huge topic of prose. I want keywords, but in my topic notes, I could add a lot of extra information there. I can, of course, close and delete and edit what I want. But you see, I can bring a lot of extra depth and detail into my mind maps without making them hard to understand, hard to read, hard to manage. So that's where the notes feature, I think, can be really very powerful. The other feature I wanted to highlight was attachments. Now, this is a great way when you're doing research, and again, you might want to pull in depth and detail from other sources into your mind map, without necessarily, again, building out too much information in the mind map itself. So attachments you can use in MindMeister to link off to websites, to files and folders, or to other mind maps, as I'll show you in a moment. So for example, let's use our Elizabeth II Wikipedia page again. Let's just copy that URL up here in the website. Let's just copy that link, come back to our presentation mind map and say, let's add an attachment, and then just paste that link, add into there. And what we've got here now is a little signpost again from MindMeister that says, if you want some detail, just head off here. So for example, I just open that up, click that link, and it's going to take me right to that destination page. Now, when you're doing research or where you're trying to build out that kind of concept, that bigger concept understanding, other resources, to have these little signposts that say, go here for more detail is really, really handy. You don't obviously want to paste that whole Wikipedia page even into your topic notes. So to say, here's some topic notes, but here's the full website page. If you want the full detail, go here. That's a really great way of making sure all of the information you need is readily to hand in one single source of truth, which is your MindMeister map. Other things we might link to or rather attach in your MindMeister map are other documents. So again, for example, we could say, let's add an attachment, and we can maybe upload, let's say, for example, maybe we've got a diagram, perhaps we've got, I don't know, maybe a biology or a scientific document that we want to upload. So we could just attach that into our mind map. And again, we might just say, right, let's link off. I need to remind myself of that document, and it's just going to pop it open there in MindMeister, readily available. So if you're studying science, this might be a diagram of a cell structure. If you're studying geography, this could be a diagram of how volcanoes or tectonic plates work. But importantly, we're not getting bogged down and buried by this information. We've just given ourselves really great little signposts to the depth and detail around our particular topic. So using that functionality, we can really build out the depth and detail. And then using the same functionality, we can actually then start to connect up our mind maps. Now, this is where I really would encourage people to sort of think of mind mapping it in layers. So we could almost sort of say connected/layers of maps. So go back to our England example. I was working with this group and I said, okay, well, let's create a mind map about England. So let's think of England as our top level, for example. That was our top level subject. So your top level subject could be 18th century history, or your top level subject could be biology. So our top level mind map is England. But then we can drill down a little bit and say, well, within the topic of England, there are some subtopics, some sort of layers below. For example, English history, English culture, English language, whatever it might be. But we created one that said English history. And then we've got sort of a detail level. And this might be actually where our note-taking map began. So you might have a lesson all about King Henry VIII, who's one of our most famous kings because he was this fat guy with 6 wives. So we might have sat in a lesson and taken notes, detailed notes about King Henry VIII, and then we're going to connect that up to our English history mind map, which is the slightly higher level. And then that English history mind map is connected to our top level, which is our England mind map. So again, just try and think about that within your subject areas, your areas of study, and you hopefully can just see the top level subject, the sort of mid-level topic area, and maybe that lowest level of sort of detail. So let's just take a look at how that might look in reality. So we had our high level England mind map, and you see I've just used that same attachment feature here, so I can just click away to that, and we'll get to that top level, which you've already got open actually, top level mind map, which has the St. George flag in the middle, so that very sort of hopefully relatively familiar sort of red and white flag, and we've got our places, our history, our culture. So this is our top level mind map, as it says here. Now, interestingly, we've then got a history branch where we've got kings and queens, world wars, explorers. And we've got a little bit of information in the mind map here, but we don't want to necessarily build out huge volumes of information in this single mind map. Otherwise, the England mind map is going to become nearly impossible for us to manage, even despite how good MindMeister is. It's just going to be too much information in one mind map. So what we've actually done here is then created a link in history to a history mind map. So we've now got a mind map which is that sort of middle level. So we've gone from the top level of England, and now we're looking at the sort of middle level, which is the history of England, or some history of England. Now we've got those same topics, kings and queens, world wars, explorers, but we've now got a little bit more space and a mind map that's specifically focused on this history aspect. So we can dive a little bit more into those kings and queens. Now, again, we haven't got the image of Elizabeth that we just got from the website here, but within any one of these topics, we can build out lots of extra information. For example, within any of these kings and queens, we might build out who their children are. Again, a little bit like a family tree. We could build out the tree of their children. So again, Prince Harry, Prince William, relatively well known around the world. There are other children. I can't remember who they are. So the key thing is within this mind map, we might go into a little bit more depth and detail in these branches, whereas in the top level mind map, we might just have those kind of headline key pieces of information that we might need to have right at that top level, the headlines, if you like. Whereas in this mid-level mind map, we might go into a little bit more detail. So for example, under our Henry branch, we've now got an image of Henry. And we've maybe just starting to build out some of the key information. So Henry VIII was very much responsible for sort of breaks in the religion in the English history of breaking from the Roman Catholic Church because he wanted to marry someone else. So we've got some kind of just starting to get into a little bit more depth and detail. We could, for example, have started to add in here a little bit about his wives, who I now can't remember, but there's, I think, something like that. And we could just start to build out a little bit more detail. But once again, we might not want to build out every tiny bit of detail about Henry VIII in this mind map, because perhaps over the course of a semester or an academic term, we're going to have a lecture or two about Henry VIII. We're maybe going to have a lesson or two about Elizabeth I. We're maybe going to have a lesson or two about Queen. So again, this mind map could get really, really big over that course of that semester. So again, what we've got here is that little paperclip icon that says, I've got another mind map, which is our detail mind map on Henry VIII. So I've gone from this top level of the England. I've then got this kind of headlines and pictures here to remind me who's who. And then I'm going into this middle level where I've got kings and queens and a little bit more information. And then I can go right down to this next level down of a detailed mind map about Henry VIII specifically. And this is where, as I said earlier, this might be your note-taking mind map. This might be the notes you take and make during a lesson or a lecture about Henry VIII specifically. And what we've got to be able to do as students is take that single lesson about Henry VIII and sort of connect it upwards to the higher level topic. And again, using the functionality of MindMeister is going to be really helpful here. So if I just go back to my mid-level mind map around Henry VIII and Elizabeth, or Elizabeth I rather, importantly, Elizabeth was the daughter of Henry. So I might use, again, that connections feature that we saw earlier and just say there's an important connection here that I need to make sure I'm keeping in my mind when I'm looking at the history of Henry VIII and Elizabeth. I need to remember that there's a relation there. But my Henry map is full of much more detail about Henry's life, his character, what he was all about. We've got the 6 wives here, and for each wife, we've now got a little bit more information. We've got who maybe they were the mother of, what happened to the marriage, the grisly beheading of several of these poor women who didn't please Henry for whatever reason. So we can really start to build out a lot more information into this detailed mind map without, once again, sort of getting lost in trying to put up too much. Once more, we've used this functionality here in the MindMeister map to link to an attachment. So something about the 6 wives, and I click that link, and off I go to, again, a Wikipedia article, but that could be anything on the internet, or it could be another document that's got much more of the detail and depth of the 6 wives, with much more information than I probably need or want. But in my mind map, I've just given myself those little signposts to say, you can go here for more depth and more detail. So you hopefully see how we've got the detail level mind map that is below the mid-level mind map, which is below the top level mind map. And if you can apply that logic to whatever subjects you're studying, you will have multiple probably high level mind maps, or you could even have a sort of, my second year at university could be your highest level mind map. And within that map, you've got maybe different topics or subjects that you're studying. But if we can connect up these mind maps and have the detail, the depth right up to the middle level, then that high level headlines, I think you're going to have a much better chance of building that rounded knowledge of your subject rather than just getting stuck and buried in the details. You're hopefully going to be more able to pull yourself up to the higher levels and understand how those details connect up. So to use my example here, if you want to understand as a sort of school level history, if you want to understand Elizabeth I as a ruler, you really kind of have to keep in mind that she was the daughter of Henry VIII. So we've got to be able to kind of connect up these things. Whereas we might have just had one lesson about Elizabeth and one lesson on Henry, we've got to be able to make the connections ourselves around how these people fit together or these topics fit together. You could, if you wanted, even move Elizabeth underneath Henry in your mind map to illustrate that she was his child. So again, within the mind map, we've got the structure to move and edit and change things to whatever makes it meaningful for you, whatever helps you to understand how these information and these ideas connects up. So for every one of these topics, world wars, explorers, we could have mind maps on details for World War I. With World War II, again, we could have in the 2, you could have the key people, you could have key places, you might have key battles. And then within each of those, you might link off to MindMeister maps that are very specific and detailed about these individual people, places, or battles, or whatever it might be. So this is just a history example because it's a subject I can vaguely talk about, but hopefully you can see how this might apply in almost any academic subject or even any sort of just general subject, whether you're studying business or medical science or whatever it might be. Most things can be broken down into that high, mid, and detail level view. And by breaking things down over those layers of mind maps, you give yourself a much better chance of understanding how they connect up. So that's where I want to spend most time today, which is talking about knowledge building, because I think that's really what the note-taking, if you improve the note-taking, you will improve the knowledge building. By connecting up those mind maps from your notes and improving and adding the depth and the detail, you really will start to better understand your subject matter and how it connects up. The final thing I just want to touch on very briefly, because it's, again, a slightly tricky one to illustrate in real time, is written essays and assignments. So the challenges for written essays and assignments are sort of, certainly again, from my experience as a student, but also from students I've worked with, is the research and the writing. So the research is information gets everywhere, and you're trying to remember what relates to what. Where did I find that piece of information? Was it a website? Was it a book? Was it an online journal? What might it be? And then the writing. Lots of people, myself included, would just jump straight into the writing. And that means often the essays, the written assignments would lack structure and they would lack sort of a flow. You would find it difficult to sort of figure out, where am I in my argument? I lose sight of the whole narrative I'm trying to build around my essay, and actually seeing how things connect up, or if you're repeating yourself or duplicating, is quite hard in that linear written style of a sort of Microsoft Word or word processing program. If you're using mind maps, you've got some great functionality to help you with both of those things. So when it comes to research, the gathering of information, using that same functionality that I've shown you already, the icons and the images to maybe highlight this is a key concept, the hyperlinks, or rather attachments as it's now called, to link off to key academic journals online or to website resources you've used to act almost like bookmarks. And then the notes feature to pull in that depth and detail and even your written text to really sort of keep everything in one place coherently. Also within the mind map, again, come back to structure. If you build and read mind maps clockwise, you give yourself a great means to build structure into your thinking from an early stage. So think about MindMeister as your upfront thinking tool. The writing and the finished written document might be in Microsoft Word, or it could be in other written tools. But if you do your thinking and organizing in the MindMeister structure, it's going to create a better structure, and almost certainly it's going to therefore create a better logic and flow to your written assignment. And then really usefully, you can do all of that thinking in MindMeister, and you don't then have to start again in Microsoft Word. You can actually just send your MindMeister mind maps into a Word document for the final sort of editing and, if you like, printing. So just a very quick example of how that might work. We've been using the history of England and Henry VIII as our kind of example topic. So let's say perhaps as a student, we've been set a written assignment, which is maybe write 1,000 words about the key events and impacts of King Henry VIII's reign. So what we might do is start off using all of our notes and all of those mind maps that we've looked at already. So we've got our knowledge maps. And then we're going to create a new mind map, which is our sort of essay plan, our written assignment. So again, remember that clockwise logic. We're going to say, okay, for my written assignment, I'm going to do a brief introduction. Now, this is where I would sort of almost suggest you break the previous rule I said in terms of keeping to keywords, because actually what we're trying to do here is build out an essay. But we could write big blocks of text like this, or just like I showed you before, we could, we could put all of that text, into notes, paste that in. Oops, sorry, I did that wrong. Notes, got to click. There we go. So instead of these big blocks of text, we can put short sort of intro text. What we're just doing here is planning the flow of our essay. So to talk about Henry's life, we need to talk about an introduction, then we're going to talk about the marriage to Catherine, the affair with Anne, leading to a break from the church, marries Anne, and on we go to wife number 3, 4, 5, 6. So here's how we might sort of structure our essay, and you'll see under each section we've kind of got some of the information that we think we're going to want to include. We might use some of our notes and hyperlinks to kind of build out that depth. But the key thing to just illustrate here is this is a mind map that's got the bones, the skeleton of our essay structure, or at least the first kind of few stages. We haven't really built out too much over here yet because it's just a demonstration. Now, importantly, what we can do here is then say to MindMeister, I'm ready to turn this into a written document. I want to send this to Microsoft Word, and all of this is doable within MindMeister. And we say, right, we don't need links, icons, images, tasks, attachments, comments, votes. We don't need numbering, branding, contents, cover page, footer. What we do want is we want the notes. And let's say export and pull this to my computer. Now, this might be pushing my internet connection here a little bit hard. So let's see how this goes. Hopefully, what we're going to get at the bottom here is a Word document. And what the software has done is just work around the mind map and push all of those branches, and these are those notes you see, and push that into a Microsoft Word document. So if I just split my screen here, hopefully it's not too nauseating. You can see here we've got introduction, which lines up with this branch here. Henry was born in 1491. Henry was born in. And then we've got the known for topic. And remember, I put that text into these notes. And you see that MindMeister knows to pull through the notes, and here's my text. So what we've got here now is the sort of core structure following this mind map. You see, hopefully, all the parallels between these topics, and that structure that I built in the mind map, which is great for structure, now means I've got structure built into my written text. And now it's a case of just building out my text and my written document, and then sort of the final editing, spell checking. But the thinking and the research and the structure is much better achieved using this mind map format, in my opinion. So a very quick look there at written assignments. It doesn't have to necessarily be an essay, a prose sort of essay. It could be a sort of scientific report with different structured sessions. So really good for kind of research and planning your essays, your written assignments. So that's my sort of whistle-stop tour through the potential of MindMeister for students. I'm going to come to the questions in just a moment, but before I do, I'm just going to put on the screen these offers that I don't want you to miss out on. So remember, you can save money on MindMeister if you're not a MindMeister user already, and you can save some money on Biggerplate Pro using those codes on the screen. I'm going to just come over to the questions panel now, but also don't forget, if you want to reach me on LinkedIn, you can find me there. You can also email me at liam@biggerplate.com if you have any questions or follow up on this webinar. I'll be happy to try and help with that. So let's take a look now at any questions that have come in. I'm sure David's been working away clearly. I can see he's answered lots of different things here. A couple of questions that I think David's covered. Functional difference between comments and notes. I'm probably not going to get too far into that. I can't see where the question is. Divyanshu, thank you for the question. Topics, notes and topic comments. So within MindMeister, you'll see on my screen here, I've got the option for notes. That's where I'm adding lots of text and depth, detail. Comments within mind maps like this, that's where you really are more likely if you're doing sort of collaborative mind mapping. And comments is where you maybe start to kind of use comments features, and it's a slightly different, you want sort of a dialogue around a topic, whereas the notes is more sort of, your notes to self. Whereas if you're doing collaborative mind mapping, you can sort of have a little comments thread on any topic. So again, in a business context, for example, if we said, here's our idea for Q2, that's our topic, we might have, for example, comments. I might leave a comment, see, I think this is great. And I can leave that comment. If maybe I was collaborating with David, he might leave a comment on this same topic saying, I think this is terrible. So between the comments and the notes, you've got great functionality to build a lot of depth on any topic in the mind map. And again, we can actually add sort of notes as well as comments. So it's not an either or. So it's really kind of just different functionality. The comments is going to give you obviously a little bit of dialogue on a topic, whereas the notes is kind of that depth and detail. I've got a question around something about Microsoft Word export. Is MindMeister Pro? Yeah, that's something I think David's covering there. Just looking in the chat for any questions. Thank you very much for the kind feedback. That's really great.
Maybe Liam, if I can chime in. I think.
Oh, hey, David. Yeah.
There was one question around engaging students in building the mind map itself. Maybe that's something that sort of.
Yeah.
Maybe that's something you could answer.
Great. Yeah, absolutely. Shaima, I think that's where that came from. Yeah, it's a really great question. And it's something where I think you've got to kind of set out the rules of the game. So when you're engaging students in the mapping, and this same principle, by the way, applies to adults. When I do workshops with grown-ups, you still have to kind of establish the rules of the game. So, for example, be clear on for example, what they can edit. So if you're actually letting them loose on the mind map, what might be helpful to do is, for example, if we created a new MindMeister map, let's just see if we can do this quickly. Let's create a new mind map here. One of the things I will quite often do with workshop groups is, for example, I might say, here's our group map, and then I'm going to break maybe my class into group 1, group 2, group 3, group 4, for example. And what I'm going to do for each group is maybe I've set them a question. So what I want to hear is their ideas, and then their sort of perhaps, again, I'm using just sort of my business hat, but maybe risks and actions. So what I might do is break my classroom up into group 1, group 2, group 3, group 4. And if I use, for example, my Henry VIII topic, I might say, well, maybe group 1, I want you to talk about his marriages. That's his kind of big topic. I might make this nice and sort of stand out for them. Group 2, I want you to talk about or cover the sort of religious things. I'm going to again make that stand out a little bit more. So this is how, just kind of making it up as I go. We might set a mind map structure that naturally makes people sort of work in groups. So you're going to be saying to group 1, don't touch group 2's branches, and similarly. So we can kind of get students kind of building out. So, for example, in the marriages, they might say kind of what do they know? What do they, instead of risks for students, you might have things like what questions do they have, and these kind of ideas. So I would advise, if you are in the teaching role, to start with a sort of a structured template. So something that kind of gives some structure to the process, because if you sort of just let students go wild and loose on a mind map, particularly if they're working on the same mind map as a group, it can get out of hand quite quickly. But certainly even just in a classroom setting, if you become the person at the front in control of the mind map, you don't actually have to have the students working on it at the same time. You can, but that can sometimes be more difficult. But actually you can control the flow of information, and you can capture at the front of the classroom on the screen, okay, group 1, tell me what you came up with about his marriages. Well, maybe one of the questions is, why did they marry him? He doesn't seem like a great chap. So, you can control the flow of information, you can capture their ideas, and students in this kind of context, and again, the same is true with adults, they like to see that their ideas have been heard. It's also helpful for connecting up different perspectives from different students, and kind of they can see how their ideas and their information connects up with one another. So I think the key kind of takeaway, if I could try and answer your question slightly more succinctly, is to set the frames of reference in the mind map template in advance, and it's going to make it easier for you to either control and manage their inputs yourself, or get them to work collaboratively on a mind map as they go. I hope that sort of touches or answers the question vaguely. There's a lot of stuff I'm kind of interested to cover in students. Got a question. Laurie, do you send me a screenshot? Oh, I see. That's David. Sorry. Any other questions? I'm just going to pop back to the questions panel. Okay, engaging the students. That's great. There's a few questions I can see that David's answered about whether you're looking at the pro version of MindMeister or these kind of things. Again, that's something I'd direct towards the MindMeister team rather than Biggerplate. I can't see anything. Welcome to everyone. Can't see any new questions that I can't answer. That David's already done a sterling job answering the questions here. So I can't see anything, David, unless there's ones that you think I'm missing. Thank you very much for the kind feedback I can see in the comments and the questions as well. That's very kind. I appreciate your time in joining. David, is there any questions you think I've missed, or topics that I should perhaps have covered?
Not that I know, but honestly, it's kind of difficult to answer questions and listen to everything.
What do you mean you can't multitask in that way, David? That's terrible. Yeah. It's very weak.
Downside of doing the Q&A.
Yeah.
But I think you've covered a lot.
There's a quick question I can just see here or in the chat, which is explain the functional difference between attachments and media. I'll just try and touch on that, because again, there's kind of lots of different options here. So attachments, if you like, is these kind of signposts to other things. So just like I showed earlier, so let's say here's we're seeing a lot of the Queen today, aren't we? Here's an example of that attachment, which is just a website link, but it could be a PDF document, it could be PowerPoint slides. You're attaching, almost like attaching to an email, you're attaching other documents. The media option in MindMeister is really about pulling media right into the mind map where it is. So that's where, for example, you might pull in, like I did earlier, a little diagram maybe that you want to have on hand. Again, we can easily kind of edit that, change that. So media is really about pulling it sort of visibly into the mind map. Worth mentioning as well, for those of you who are in the educating role rather than being students yourself, it's also possible in MindMeister to pull in YouTube videos right into the mind map. So for example, we've got a video here we did for MindMeister. Let's grab that link there. So maybe a student has found a video that they find useful about a particular topic that they're studying. We can actually say, sorry, not media, rather attachment. Pull that in here, add that in. Oh, I've done that wrong, obviously. What have I done there? You can do this because I did it last week. Oh, there we go. So we can just paste the video, and this is a great way again for students to be able to pull videos and resources right into the mind map. And you'll see it's actually going to play that video for me within the MindMeister map. So I think for students, particularly when they're doing those knowledge building exercises, when they're sort of building up their information, their ideas around a topic, to be able to pull in the different media, the different links, the different attachments into one coherent structure, I think is really very powerful. MindMeister, I think, is one of the best tools out there for that, because it's got this online tool that means it's naturally able to pull in all these different online sources really, really quickly and easily. So I hope that gives you a little bit of a view on the media versus attachments question there. Hopefully that works. Okay, so I think I've covered as many questions as I'm probably able to in the time. But as I said, please don't hesitate to get in touch with me using the contact details on the screen. David has put in, I think, to the chat or somewhere, I think support@mindmeister.com, I think, is the best email. David, is it for people who've got perhaps MindMeister specific questions to follow up with?
Yes, indeed. So that would be the best way. Or feel free to also reach out via Twitter or Facebook. Or we are on most social media platforms, and our stellar support team will reach out to you. Yeah, and maybe Liam, you can also say, like, the two last webinars that you did might still be interesting for others, or so perhaps they want to look at that too.
Yeah. Absolutely. So if you're interested in some of the other topics we've covered recently in webinars, actually, you can have a look at our YouTube channel. So YouTube, and just search for Biggerplate. You'll see we've got a huge range of tutorials and interviews, but particularly the last two videos, we did a webinar about MindMeister for startups, and a very popular session and topic is MindMeister for personal productivity. So if you're feeling a bit overwhelmed by your to-do list, I'd recommend having a look at that. So lots and lots of resources from us on using MindMeister. And yeah, as I said, if you have any follow-up questions, please let me know. This mind map and the recording of this session will be available within sort of 24 hours as well. So if you want to go back, revisit anything, watch it slower, watch it faster, or mute me, you can, of course, do that as well. That'll be online very shortly. But I can see I'm just tipping over my my time with you all. So I think I'll take this opportunity to say a big thank you to you all for taking time out of your day to join me here on this webinar. I hope I've been able to give you some ideas and some inspiration, some tips, some sort of prompts for employing mind mapping and MindMeister as a student yourself, or helping the students you know in your life to leverage these tools, which I do know from personal experience can and almost certainly will make a very significant difference. So thank you all very much for joining me. Have a fantastic rest of the day wherever you are in the world. And until next time, best of luck with your mind mapping.